I really kind of go towards directors, because there are directors that I love what they do for sound. They think about it so much, and I'm lucky enough to work with Ryan Coogler, who very much thinks of sound, and has Ludwig Göransson, his composer, who always alters his score to work with different films. Like Creed. You had rappers from Philadelphia, and even like Wakanda Forever, he had rappers that were that rapped in Mayan. So like the connections of music to those films is so strong. And I have a lot of music love, of course, in my history and film and sound. But so Ryan Coogler, and I got I work with J.C. Chandler, who is amazing. Also thinks a lot about sound. When he did the movie, Most Violent Year and Margin Call, really big, but All Is Lost, which was so little dialogue, and that's where I make that big connection of Castaway to that film. And on that film, Gary Reichstrom was a big he helped us pull sounds that his favorite, like water sounds and so forth, and things that would work in the ocean. Zemeckis is still a thing for me. Fincher. Paul Thomas Anderson, I got to be an assistant on Punch Drunk Love, and I still, every time he makes a film, I'm excited to see it. Like, I love what they did with One Battle, and I love his approach and his thoughtfulness to sound. Even like, Barry in that movie Punch Drunk Love, he beats up a bathroom at one point, and I love where Paul was like, well, what can we do? Can we, how do we distort the sound? I want all the sound is accurate for the scene, but what do we do to mess up the sound and make it sound distorted? And so he just had Gary Reichstrom and Chris Boyes. He started having not Boyes, but Scarbozio. What can you do to distort the sound and make it sound messed up? I want the sound to sound like he feels. And I just love that approach, that thoughtfulness of like, this should sound wrong now, because let's get in his head. Who else? I mean, you can go back to Kubrick. Of course, he's, such a huge thing in sound, and I love his films. But I find that I'm always torn in the direction of filmmakers who use sound with such a degree. There are, George Lucas, of course, with Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back. I say that like, nonchalantly, but Ben Burt, and what he brings to sound design is one of the godfathers of sound design. And of course, going back to Zemeckis, thinking of Back to the Future, Ridley Scott. I mean, you can go back into other, Hitchcock, the way he used, in Birds, and how he used, electronic instruments to actually create this cool soundscape that actually was also like, scary. I loved Weapons. I loved what Zach did with that. I think he's, a newer filmmaker that's really using sound in a very interesting way. I got to mix the movie Predator Badlands last year, and I thought, Predator in the 80s, what an interesting, to have this. And Dan Trachtenberg kept that feeling alive. Like, I think he still is thinks about sound as well, and I think Predator, the movie alone, had such amazing sound marks of like, this kind of futuristic sound design mixed with, being in the forest and using real raw material. And this space, there's so much space in the original Predator movie. It's not filled with like sound to sound to sound. It actually has space in the score.